48-hour art check, round 135.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Got Squatchy in the chats. What's up, man? And yeah, so sorry we are late. That is my fault. But I think my fish will survive, so that's nice. Which I'll talk about during challenges, I guess. But, yeah. So
Squatchy want to sketch today.
Oh, good.
On my channel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was him because he used his real name.
So, oh, right.
No, I know.
That's funny. Well, cool. Should we jump into it?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Josh, what have you done in the last 48 hours here?
All right. So I inked the page that I've been working on for quarterly stories, and then I finished inking the first two panels on that page. So pretty excited. Yeah. And so yeah, I'm pretty. I think it'll go okay, and I'm kind of surprised I've been able to keep up because it's been a very busy few weeks or week or so. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's looking really good. I like the cross hatching on that blue fox underneath the titles.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. Scott, how about you?
Accomplishments. Let's see. Well, Sunday was Easter, so a lot of family stuff going on there. But I got some stuff done. I finished editing my Creative South vlog video, which I uploaded today. I did a video, my Kickstarter update, kind of because I hadn't done that yet, because the day after my Kickstarter, I went to Creative South. So I just let everyone know that yeah, funded and everything, and that I'm working on it. And I did another video to announce the winner of the sketch, the zombie sketch. Yeah, Squatchy Inc. won it. So congratulations. I'm working on the anthology cover right now, which I'm showing a little bit, but I don't want to show much because I want to do probably a big reveal. So you can kind of see some of the typography, and that's just a placeholder for some hand-drawn type. Working on some client proposals, and just get some Etsy orders that I realized I was out of stock on, so I've got to make a Costco run because I don't have time to make a cat print run. But yeah, that's about my accomplishments.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, and I didn't get much done at all. So I don't know that I need to take 30 seconds. I got a little bit of sketching done, and that's pretty much it. So I'm a little behind on some stuff. Did meet with some of the people that are getting the Kickstarter ready, and kind of talked about some of that, and got some Trello boards set up and whatever. But basically nothing really to show. So how about challenges, Josh?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to be doing a little bit of rebranding because my website and a lot of things like for my illustration business and stuff have been kind of like sitting in decline for a couple of years because of my full-time gig, and it's just about time for refresh. So that's one of the challenges, is just kind of approaching that and trying to figure out, like right now I'm researching, WordPress versus, I know you guys both made the change over to Squarespace, so I might do that. Might see if WordPress is more functional for what I need. But it's definitely something where it's a lot of work and a lot of early legwork. And so that mixed with other things and just kind of juggling family life, work life, and my regular output, having to add other things on top of that just makes it really complicated and tiring. So yeah, that's pretty much my challenge. But at the same time, I had a really good weekend, and it was fun to see the kid do like Easter egg hunts and stuff. And, yeah,
that's awesome. How about you, Scott?
Challenges. Yeah, just not that it was a challenge, but Easter. So but we all. I mean, it's Sunday too. So I mean, theoretically, we should be taking a rest on Sunday, but I never do. So, but yeah, just a little bit of family drama with the Easter thing, which usually don't have any family drama, but it's nothing that I was really involved in, so kind of skirted that. But yeah, just so kind of some personal stuff that's seems like good type of things that we'll find out. I'll find out more going forward. Um, and just getting caught up. I kind of left a lot of stuff hanging when I went out of town, and just basically it took me kind of a week to kind of get caught up, and I have a couple of people that are kind of waiting to hear back from me as far as some job proposals, and I didn't know if they were still going to be waiting or if they would move on, but it sounds like they're might be ready to go, and whether those happen or not, I don't know, but we'll see. So those are my challenges.
Cool. Yeah, mine are similar in just that got back and then I had to kind of catch up and get ready for the semester to start, which started today. And then we kind of did a last minute trip, and so I was driving back and got back later than I wanted. And anyway, when I got home from work today, my fish tank was like just I don't know, one of the filters had kind of crashed, and so it was like super cloudy. And so I don't know what time it is now, 11. So yeah, for the past 5 hours I've been fixing that to try to save the fish, because I've got a lot of fish in there that are pretty big. I mean, I've got like 3 fish that are over 12 inches, and then a handful that are kind of like 6 to 10 inches. And so to replace them, it wouldn't be financially worth it. Anyway, so that took a long time, and I don't know. I'm pretty tired because of the lack of sleep and the driving and the first day of school, and then it doesn't sound like working on a fish tank would be that tiring, but I have to carry 5-gallon buckets full of water across my house, and I moved about 125 gallons of water that way tonight. So yeah, there's a long rambly challenge.
Wow. Sounds like you got your workout in though.
Yeah, that would count. A lot of this, it was good. So, oh yeah, and I forgot, like I was gonna draw yesterday, and then this never happens to me, but like my back, it didn't go out, but I had like this sharp stabbing pain like in between my spine and my shoulder blades, and it hurt to breathe. And so I looked it up and I called some of my cousins who are nurses, and of course I self-diagnosed on the internet, and so I either have lung cancer, a minor heart attack, or a rib out of place. But I couldn't move. It was pretty bad. So it's better. It's better today. But I probably, if I would have had time, it would have been nice to go to a chiropractor or a massage therapist or something. But I'll deal with it later. But yeah, so that kind of put me out, and that was like right before I drove for 4.5 hours.
Oh,
so
man.
anyway, it's rough 24 hours, but it was fun weekend with all the family stuff and whatnot.
Nice.
So yeah, sorry that took forever. I'll try not to be really rambling. What are your plans, Josh?
So I'm definitely planning on, like, I'm doing a thing on Wednesday that's like a portfolio review that I've been invited to participate in with a bunch of other art directors. So that should be pretty exciting. And then my band's actually playing a show on Saturday, so I'm going to be doing extra practices this week just to prep for that. But once again, that's like a fun problem to have. And then I'm just hoping to, like, by the next art check, I would like to have possibly the whole page inked. So that would be a good place to be. I don't know if it'll be completely finished because I usually have to go over my blacks a couple times. but at least having the rough pencil or rough inks for those pages done would be good. So that's kind of where I hope to be. And I'd like to get a little bit of progress just on the kind of figuring out more clearly like the direction that I want to go for my website and stuff like that, so I can start making little steps towards that too. And you guys both went through that, so you know like kind of the pace of that. It's a slow slog, but it's definitely well worth it, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think if you haven't done it recently, you forget like how much work that is. Like it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's just a billion tiny little tasks that you have to do to transfer it or update it or whatever. It's it's not like one big thing. It's just like, oh, now I have to resize these 200 images or
Yeah.
whatever. It's just like, or now I have to go through my entire portfolio for the last 3 years and decide what I like because I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be as bad or as monumental. I mean, like, luckily, the nice thing is it's, again, a good problem to have, because I think a lot of people, when they're rebranding and stuff or coming up with their new sites, they have to kind of like gather a portfolio. And for me, it's just honing it down because I have
Right.
a lot of work. So it's definitely an opposite problem from problems I've had in the past when building websites, where I'm like, what work should I show? Now it's more of like what work shouldn't I show? Like, what do I need to hone down to? Is this showing my capabilities enough? Should I show more of this? Like that kind of problem, which is a good problem to have. So,
Yeah, agreed. So we've got Victor in the chats, and he says yo yo, and then says that he forgot to add another yo. So, Scott, what are your plans?
Plans, hopefully finish this. Well, I don't know if I'll do it in the next 48 hours, but I'm going to be working on the 100 cover. I need to get some. There's a couple of videos I wasn't expecting to get out that I need to get out soon, because I'm kind of doing sort of a collab thing, and it's so time's kind of a thing. So I got to work on those, and then just I got to catch up on some client work.
Cool.
That's it.
I'm just gonna get back on the horse. Hopefully my back holds out after all the water I moved today, and then I've got the sketch for that illustration. I'd like to finish that and get that colored, and then I'll be doing the boards and script for the anthology Kickstarter, because I've got some people that are waiting on me to know what assets they need to make. So I've got to kind of decide what's going on with that. So that's kind of my plan. All right. So, sorry. What should we do? What do you guys want to talk about for a topic?
that's a good question.
I figured you guys already had something.
The secret,
We got a couple to
Scott,
hit.
is that we usually decide what we should talk about 5 seconds before we go live. That's, but we do have. I don't have a device that I can pull it up on.
Pull up Trello.
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm gonna get that off the screen. Let's see what we got. Because we did write down quite a few beforehand. The last couple times. So let's see. Oh, you want to talk about risk red flags with clients?
Okay.
Or client communications, reverse engineer to trade up. We did style and voice, jumping too quickly to execution, toxic competitiveness. Any of this jump out at you?
They all sound pretty good. I'd have to probably have one of you guys kick it off, and then.
Okay, what do you think, Josh?
I'm such a blank slate today. I'm gonna aim for, let's just go backwards. So we'll do red risk flags.
Okay.
Or risk red flags with clients.
Okay. All right. So Let's see. There we go. Today's topic is client red flags. And so once you get, a few clients under your belt, kind of in any creative discipline, whether that be, video or writing or graphic design or illustration, you start to see some common red flags that'll kind of pop up. And there's some ways to deal with these, and some people have different opinions that if you see a single red flag that you bail on that client, and others say that there's kind of a certain threshold that you can kind of deal with and teach them through. But I thought it might be interesting to kind of go through and just talk about some experiences that we've had with clients, and these are probably all going to be clients that we either haven't worked with because we kind of killed the relationship early on based on these red flags, or that we worked with a long time ago and don't mind talking about because they're terrible clients. And maybe we should qualify that statement. In my mind, a terrible client is going to be one of two things generally, maybe three. One is they're going to kind of nickel and dime you to death, where they're kind of the bargain shop where they're trying to just squeeze every last ounce out of the nickel or dime that they're paying you, and they really don't understand the value of what it is that you're bringing to the table. That's one. Another one is and in that category, I would say kind of the people that are trying to get you to work for free. Kind of fall into that category. Another one is kind of the relentless goalpost mover that kind of constantly, kind of shifts the objectives and the goals, and so you can never quite finish anything or achieve anything because every time you talk to them, it's like you're talking about a completely different project or the project has grown. So that would include like scope creep and project creep and deadline creep and all that type of stuff. And then the third category, I think that kind of these negative clients fall into would just be like just a weird or bad attitude, just kind of a lot of negativity, or there's a number of different attitudes that could fall into. But those are the three types of clients that I just avoid. It's just not worth it. Pretty much anybody else. Even if you don't know what you're doing, I'm willing to work with you and kind of teach you the process and that type of thing. But if you've got a negative attitude, or if you undervalue kind of the work that's going on, kind of aggressively undervalue it, or if you just don't know what you want and it's just constantly in flux and changing, like any of those three situations are super frustrating. So what are some red flags that you guys have kind of noticed as you're kind of in that initial discovery phase with clients? Anything that stands out?
Yeah, well, one of the things, you already mentioned the actual red flag, but I just kind of wanted to touch base on what you're talking about as far as the clients that want everything very cheap and want to nickel and dime you. And those clients, and this is like almost always the case, are the ones that not only do they want it the cheapest, but they want you to do the most work, the most changes. And I don't know if it's just because for them they don't see the value in the kind of installed or like the finished product itself. They see the value in how much time you're putting into it, how much they're constantly wanting you to go back, because the more you're going back, the more you're working, the more they feel like they're getting something out, they're more out of it for their money, which isn't a lot to begin with. So it's just, not only are those the clients that want everything super cheap, they're also the ones, usually the jobs are going to take the most time, because they think they understand what their set of values is vastly different than what yours is, where you want their finished product to be great and everything, and they're more concerned about, oh, well, how much time did you spend on this, or how many changes did I get out of this, penance that I'm paying you. So, and as far as red flags, with almost any of these that you mentioned, they usually, at least, and maybe it's just with experience because I've been doing this, but usually that's why they're called red flags, because they pop out. You can identify them pretty quickly, and I mean, it doesn't usually get better if you and it's hard, especially when you're in a scarcity mindset. If you really need the work, it's hard to kind of say, yeah, this isn't going to be worth it at the time, because you might need the work, and you might say, well, you know, I can use anything right now. So, but you'll probably end up regretting it. So, but usually that comes up pretty early on, as far as, you see these red flags, and if somebody's worried about price in the beginning, it's not going to get better. So,
Yeah, and Scott, you bring up a really good point. Maybe we should define what a red flag is and why we even care about it, because I like what you're saying there. Basically, in my mind, and you guys tell me kind of how you're defining it, but a red flag is it's a little indication that there's a big problem, either with that relationship or with that client or whatever. And so at any point in time, if one of these particular red flags pops up, it's not that particular thing itself is problematic, but that it points to a significant problem that's going to happen in the future if you don't either do something to rectify that situation, or kind of just say, hey, maybe this isn't for you. And what you're bringing up is kind of initially, if they are fighting you on the price like super hard, and you're charging a reasonable price, that's a red flag for me, because every time I've experienced that never ends. It's not like that happens during the beginning discovery phase and then just goes away and you have a great relationship with that client afterwards forever. It's like, if that is a struggle at the beginning, I'm not talking about like normal negotiation on price, but like aggressive and weird and kind of demeaning negotiation, where they try to like get you to devalue your work and get you to kind of feel like you're charging too much and that type of thing, where they start doing that type of manipulative stuff. That's not going to stop. As long as you are in contact with that person, it will continue to be that the entire relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely vouch for that. Like, the only clients, and keep in mind when I'm talking about clients, I'm talking about ones from my own freelance business, not from where I work.
Right.
But when I've had clients in the past that kind of argue about the wage that you quote them, and argue in a way that's, like you were saying, it's beyond reasonable. It's not like about, well, hey, our budget's this. It's more like, well, I've gotten this for this much from these people, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Usually, to me, that's a really good sign to just, I mean, to me, at this point in my career, I tend to just tell that client, like, well, good luck, and find someone else.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that's a
and,
great way to just say, hey, maybe if that's fine, because here's the thing that's super interesting. As soon as they go, well, because this happened to me 2 months ago, somebody was like, how much do you charge for a video? And I told them, well, it's variable, but I start at X. And they were like, oh my gosh, like I could get that for a fifth of that price. And I said, oh, you should go do that. And they're like, no, but I want to work with you. I'm like, not for the money you're talking about. Like, if you've got somebody who's bargain basement and you're cool with that, do it. That's great. I don't know. You're not going to hurt my feelings.
And I mean, this isn't to say, like, if you have a client whose budget isn't meeting yours, and they're reasonable, then you do what any reasonable business would do. Like, you don't maybe offer the filet mignon on the menu, but you offer other things on the menu that they might be able to afford. But don't let them talk you down too much on the filet mignon, because then you're going to be like, spending more money on the resources and the time than you're making. And at that point, that's a loss. And like I said, just through experience, I've found those clients like that is never a one-time conversation. It will always repeat. And to me, a really good sign of a client, and this is a potential red flag, because a lot of these things, when you're starting out, like, one thing you shouldn't do is assume everyone's going to rip you off.
Yeah.
That's a bad way to start out, because you're going to turn off almost any client who, heck, they have no reason to trust you, especially when you're new, and to think that you're not going to rip them off. So, like, putting that vibe out, I think, in an email or in text can actually turn off like a lot of really good clients.
Right.
So I want to preface that by saying, like, don't be too paranoid, but you definitely need to realize it's business. And so, and I think this is something artists struggle with, young artists especially. Um, and just like any business, you want to make sure that you're using a contract, that you're solidifying a deal, and that you're not getting screwed in the deal. I mean, that's just basic business. And if you don't do that, you might actually end up having a really rough time doing freelance. Another big kind of red flag, and I'd say potential red flag, sometimes this just means you need to talk it out with the client. But there are a lot of clients who have kind of an I know it when I see it mentality. And to me, that's a big red flag of the second thing you brought up, Cory, which is the idea of like this kind of shifting goalposts. Because if you know it when you see it, but you actually don't know it well enough to verbalize it or to show visual examples or to give any semblance of an idea of a target, you're pretty much putting me blind in a room and telling me to pick up an object and then say, like, there's 20 objects in here, but one of them might be the right one. Well, what does it look like? I don't know. You're the creative. Find the object. And the likelihood of success in that scenario is pretty slim. And it also makes it really difficult to write up a good contract or come up with a written agreement, because you need to be able to actually write and verbalize what you're going to be executing. So it actually is a bad situation for both the client and the freelancer in that scenario, because if they don't know what they want, and they don't have like a checkbook with endless zeros that they can write at the end of it, then you're both walking into a dangerous situation. So like for me, like even though I include in my contracts to kind of fight that a little bit, I include revision clauses where I past a certain point, revisions charge a certain amount. I also include like a description so that like if the brief is fulfilled, then the money is owed for the job. Basically, if you ask me to mow your front yard for $20 and we have an agreement, a written agreement that I'm going to get $20 for mowing your lawn, then when I mow your front lawn, you can't turn around and say, oh, we said front lawn and back lawn. Right. That's a whole different amount of work. And once again, it's like, it's just a matter of like being really clear from the get-go about that. And there's a lot of clients who are really well-meaning, but just haven't thought it out and kind of are jumping the gun, and maybe they shouldn't be hiring a freelancer yet. And you might be the freelancer who talks them into what they should be doing. So you can ask a lot of questions that kind of get them relevant pointers. And I think that's one of the reasons hiring a seasoned designer or illustrator is well worth it. Whereas I think a lot of people who hire will want to hire somebody fresh out of college who's going to work for cheap. They're going to pull all-nighters and do beautiful work for like way undervalued cost. But unfortunately, a lot of those scenarios, that younger illustrator or designer isn't going to know those questions to gear the client in the right direction, so they don't end up in that kind of loop of just owing money from endless revisions and endless versions and iterations of an idea that could probably be done very quickly with just a little thinking at the beginning.
Yeah. Or worse, in that situation, the client thinks that they need X, because they've identified, some kind of problem, but they haven't thought it through. And so an inexperienced designer or illustrator delivers X. But an experienced illustrator or designer would ask the questions to realize, we're going to drill down and we're going to find the actual problem. And I don't think you need X. I think you need X, Y, and Z, and so giving you 15 different versions of X is not going to solve the problem. But giving you one version of X, Y, and Z actually solves the problem and, turns everything around. So yeah, and one way that I've found that is really helpful in that situation that you kind of touched on, Josh, is if you were to say, if they're like, I don't really know what I want. I know what problem I have. and I'll know it when I see it. But I need a logo, or I need an animation or whatever. Um, I will say, you know what? It kind of sounds like you're guessing at what you want. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to put the execution of this project on hold. And if you're down for it, let's go into some exploration. Let's do some discovery. And then at the end of that discovery, if you would like to you move on to another contract and another phase of this project, we can do that.
Yeah.
But my discovery is going to be, and then you quote them a price, and then you'd be very specific, like that's going to give you, roughly whatever, right? And if you say, at the end of this, you're going to have, we'll explore, this problem, and we'll kind of go through, and then you can decide whether you want to continue with that relationship or not, and then you get the money up front, and you do that, and then you're kind of doing what you're saying, where you're eliminating the possibility of scope creep, because you've defined that for before we get started on this project, you're going to pay for me to explore the problem, because
Yeah.
you don't know what's going on, and neither do I, and so let's spend some time exploring that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that Josh kind of touched on, which is another red flag. Josh talked about contracts, and I would say a big red flag for me, anyone who is hesitant to sign a contract, I would go running, because
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
contracts aren't made only to protect you as an artist; they're also made to protect the client, and it's not even. I mean, most of it is just like, people sometimes interpret things differently, and it's a better way to spell things out so everyone knows what is expected, what they're going to be getting, and so anyone that's hesitant about signing a contract, that's kind of scary for me anyway, and that's
That's a
something.
huge red flag.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
That's
really good point, Scott. Because for me, the reason why would you be hesitant to sign a reasonable contract? Like if the
yeah.
contract is crazy,
Right.
then you negotiate terms of the contract. But if it's like a reasonable standard contract of like you get this, I get this, and they're like, hey, well, in my day we just did work, on a handshake, and don't you trust me? And if they're trying to talk you out of legal documents,
Yeah.
the reason that they're doing that is because they're going to screw you. Like
Yeah.
that is such a giant red flag. Like they have a specific intent to get as much out of you as possible and not give you a dime.
Yeah, and actually, I want to tack onto that too, because not just contract, but be leery of clients who do a lot of talking and not a lot of writing. Because once again, like whatever's written, like in an email exchange, like could be brought up later as like, hey, we agreed to this, this was fulfilled, and now you owe me money, like, you know what I mean? So but if something's said over the phone, it's a he said she said scenario. It's very convenient for somebody not wanting to pay their bills. And so like, um it's a really good idea not only to get things in writing, like in an email, but also to get a brief. Just having someone who's hiring a creative have to sit down and write out what they're thinking, is a very valuable thing as well, because of the fact that a lot of times people have verbal requests that aren't really well thought out, because once again it takes a little less ingenuity. There's a moment where your brain thinks it and says it. There's no pause before you press send. And most people, like when they write things out, they kind of read it over before and go, oh, did this make sense? And
Right.
that kind of second moment will spare you and the client a lot of wasted time as well. But I'm always leery of clients that do a lot of talking and are really hesitant to do any writing, because once again, like if it's just verbally said, it's wind, like as far as the law is considered. It's, I mean, there is a thing contractually called a verbal agreement, but that's really hard to prove if there's not a ton of witnesses. And so,
Yeah, and
um,
if you're looking to prove something in court, that
yeah,
relationship has been shot a long time ago.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but if you have somebody who says something and they're like, hey, let's do this, and it's on the phone or whatever, and you say, Great. Just to clarify, I'll shoot you over a change order or an email or whatever, and just respond if I have that clear. Then you have kind of a written agreement to that. Or if they try to
Yeah.
dissuade you from writing, so it's not necessarily that they don't necessarily want to write themselves, because a lot of people don't.
100%.
But if they're like trying to dissuade you from writing as well, oh no, we're in a hurry, let's just do it. And it's like, no, let's make sure we're doing the right thing first, and we do that by writing things.
Yeah, and those emails are so important because right now I've been putting this off, but I had a client recently that I did some logo work for, and everything was going fine. I have a contract and everything. It spells out everything, but somewhere down the line they just decided for whatever reason that they were going to go in a different direction. And I don't know if they, I'll know when I send out the final invoice, I got paid for part of it, but they just kind of dropped off. And according to my contract, it says if I'm a certain percent of the way, then I get the full amount because it was pretty much done. There were just some minor changes, and then they probably talked to somebody else as far as because there was a number of people involved or whatever, and somewhere they decided to go in a different direction. Now, there's also a thing that says whether if they're happy with the work or if they're not, there's a certain thing there. But in my emails, and I've got things, them saying, oh, this is great, we love it and everything. So if they try to come back and they say, well, we just weren't happy with it, I've got the emails right there that says, well, you said you were here.
Yeah.
But and I've got that a couple times, but there were some other times just over the phone that they mentioned that. And I was looking for that conversation in the emails and it wasn't there. Like, oh, I must have said that. That must have been over the phone. So I don't have any record of that. Yeah. So yeah, definitely go back and
just to clarify and kind of reiterate what Cory was saying too, like this isn't to say to be all letter of the law with your clients. It's just a matter of like you want to almost view yourself as like a storefront. And so, somebody's coming in, they're going to buy a car, you walk them through the process of buying the car, but what do you hand them at the end? You hand them a contract with all the specs of the car, right? Because you want to make sure they know and what car they're walking out of there on. And if you're a good person and you're not being like a sleazy car salesman, you're not like filling the tank with like sand or like doing some weird tricks to like try to screw the person. You're sincerely trying to give them the thing that they came in to get. So once again, like when you're on the phone and they're like, hey, I want these things, it's good for you to take notes of it. So that you're sure to get the job done. And then also just to send like a quick email, like, hey, just to reiterate, like, these are the things I'll be working on. This is when we'll invoice. This is how we'll do it. Like, give them a whole list of expectations, because not only that, like, that's a way to kind of coach a client to be a lot more pleased with the work, because a lot of what we do is managing expectations too. And so like, that's a huge part, but it is a huge red flag, I think, if a client doesn't know what they want and wants to hire a creative to be creative. Like I find that to be a really dangerous situation, and I think like Cory had a good option and a good solution, but I would say that I'll know it when I see it. Kind of vague clients that no matter how much you kind of try to hone the thought or the direction, kind of refuse to take a road, that can be a really dangerous thing. Because once again, that could be, if you imagine yourself as a storefront, like, okay, this is the person who wants to look at every item in the store, and now it's like halfway through the sales day, and you're still walking the same person through the store, and you're like, at some point, this person should probably buy something or maybe leave, because it's not, we don't have like an entire day to walk like one customer through the entire store. And so it's more of that kind of thing. I think that's the red flag about that scenario.
Yeah. And the difference being if they want to pay you up front for the experience of walking through the entire store.
Yeah.
That's
welcome.
fine. And that's the difference for me is there are some people who don't know what they want, but they are willing to pay for the exploration because they understand the value of that. 100%. And there are other people who don't know what they want and they want the exploration for free, and those are two different different things. We've got some really good stuff in the chats. Squatchy Inc. brought up a really good red flag. People who say that they will promote you and pass on your card to all of these people that they know. And this comes in a lot of different forms, but it all feels the same.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about people promising exposure. There's a line in from Shakespeare that says, "I think she doth protest too much," meaning that if you are sitting there talking about something a lot and trying to convince somebody of something a lot, it feels like you're trying to cover up for something. And here's an example of that. You meet somebody and they tell you, man, I am super trustworthy. Like everybody I know really trusts me. Like I never lie. Like you should totally just trust me. Like I'm just a really truthful person. Like you believe me, right? Like I'm really one of those like super honest people. Like everybody I know says this about me. Like if you talk about that enough, people are like, are you lying to me right now? Like what is happening? This is so weird, right?
Yeah.
It feels the same way. Because here's where I know someone is trustworthy. If they behave in a trustworthy way, if they do and say things that are honest and above board. But if they tell me, it's weird, right? You take that into exposure, right? Their exposure should be obvious, okay? Not because somebody told me, but because I look at a situation and I go, hey, that would be great for me. If I got this thing, I can see myself without anybody trying to convince me of it, how this would be beneficial to me, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as the client starts to go, oh man, this is going to be really big for you. Just think about your portfolio that you're going to, and think about what you're going to be able to say to people afterwards and the work that you're going to be able to show. I mean, this is going to launch you. This is going to be great. And they start to pitch how amazing this experience is going to be for your future, not for your present, because they're not trying to pay you for it. I'm like, well, yeah, but why do you feel the need to pitch me so hard on that?
Yeah.
One thing that I'll say is that most people that want to offer exposure are not the same people that are in a position to actually provide exposure. They don't have an audience. They don't, there are people like, so here's a situation right now. I mentioned earlier that I got to get some videos out because I did a design, a tour poster for a rather big YouTuber. And I offered this YouTuber did not mention this or try to offer exposure. I'm the one that kind of said, I could do this for this rate if we can kind of, possibly do some sort of a collab or mention me on the channel or whatever, because this person actually has a very large audience. And I find that that's something that hopefully that's going to benefit me, and we'll find out if that's the case. But that was something I was willing to risk and take a reduced cut, because I did two posters at the same time. This one was about, less than 25% of the price of the other one. They both took about the same amount of time, but I see the value in, there is some valuable exposure, but that's something that usually you have to decide if it's worth it for you, and you should be the one to make that decision or make that suggestion. Typically anyone that's offering you exposure, they don't have the exposure to give.
Yeah. And I mean, I would recommend anybody who falls into the exposure trap, like just spend like a week or two in LA and it'll shake you of the exposure trap. Every single person you meet
Just eat out.
wrote a screenplay that's going to be the next Oscar winning movie. Every single person you meet in LA has a movie that's going to be huge, that's going to be big for everyone. And don't get me wrong, there's these 1 in a million chances where that actually happens. But what's weird is usually a lot of the times in those scenarios, it's groups of friends who really believed in a project and then just all put in the time out of love, not out of like some sort of weird conversation where they were all coaxed into something based on the exposure thing. The thing I would recommend is just do the math on the time you're spending And then hopefully you've calculated a rate. We'll have to do an episode about that, just coming up with a rate that you should charge. But hopefully you've calculated a rate for yourself, like a rough hourly of what you need to make as a freelancer.
Yeah.
Just do the math on that and be like, if I just took that money and spent it on advertising, would that be better exposure than this weird hypothetical exposure that's being offered? And most of the time, the answer is going to be yes, that you can actually create more exposure for yourself than a lot of these charlatans can. And then like just reiterating what Scott said too, like I've been freelancing for about 15 years now, and like there has never been a client who promised exposure, who gave me exposure. The ones that could give me exposure paid really well.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird thing where it's like if you're saying like you can give me exposure, so I've done art for Miller Lite. Are you going to do more exposure than Miller? Like, do you have that big of an advertising firm? Because they paid really well. So, like, what's because most of these companies are like startups and stuff, and it's like, what's your little startup going to do to expose my art to the world? Not to be a jerk or anything, but it's just like I've never heard that kind of line when I've worked with major clients. When you work with major clients, usually they have their stuff worked out. They know their budget. They know it really well. They know exactly what they want you to do. There's limited amounts of revisions. If it is, like Cory said, exploratory, there's money involved in that exploration. So like I said, I wouldn't fall for the exposure trap at all. The only time to do it, I would say, is if it's somebody you're a fan of. Like, I love Monty Python, so I did that Monty Python group show because I knew I could sell prints. And aside from that, like, I knew I love Monty Python, so that's why I did it.
Yeah.
Monty Python didn't come to me and go like, dude, we're going to give you really good exposure for this thing. Like that would be really weird. They wouldn't have to. They could just say, we're Monty Python, like look us up online. And it's like, oh, okay. You're like, you know, this massive thing. You're why the internet calls spam and email. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's the people who can give you exposure, like reiterating what they were saying, don't need to brag about giving you exposure. The when they send you an email, you'll be like, oh crap, this could be a lot of like you won't need it said in the email. You'll just see the name or whatever and be like, ooh, that is a lot of exposure.
Right.
You
know? Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. Quick, I'll just fire a couple things off. One thing, I've never ever turned away something from exposure that I've regretted. Nothing that they ever said was going to be big actually was big. Now, if you are in a situation where, like, there's a couple things I'm approaching now that look like they could be cool, and if it comes to a point where they offer me some sort of equity or something, I may take that because I like the project. So if you like the project, that could be a different story, but you got to be smart about it. The other thing I just want to say real quick is my line with exposure that I always tell people, and feel free to use this if you want, but you might have to change the state, but I always say, if somebody offers exposure, I say, look, I live in Arizona. If I want exposure, I'll go out and stand in the sun because either way I'm going to get burned.
Like it.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Victor,
I would expose a certain finger when I hear that exposure. But yeah, so like I think we covered that, but be really leery of that when you're hungry and you're a young artist, because like there's sharks out there, man, and like there are a lot of exposure sharks, and like it'll take you maybe a year of just trying to get into illustration to get the emails. You'll start getting them, and you'll usually, a really big red flag is there's no money mentioned throughout the entire process, and when you bring up money, it kind of ties into the first thing. When you bring up money, there's a lot of like backpedaling and weird kind of avoidance of talking about money, and it's definitely an interesting thing that I think to be leery of, because once again, you want to realize like you're a business, and all businesses have to deal with somebody who wants to come into your business and get free stuff. Yep. You know. So
I've got a couple. I think they might be more yellow flags than red flags because they're really situational. But Victor Rodriguez in the chat brings up a really good example where he said he was telling a story basically about how he had a client that had two bosses. And so another situation that it's not a red flag for me because it's not like 100% of the time a problem, but it will cause the price to go up in my bid if there's ever any situation where it's a decision by committee.
Yeah.
I will not raise the price if they're willing to contract with a single decision maker. I'm very clear with that, and then say, listen, it sounds like there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen, which is fine. I understand how that works. Maybe this is a C-level decision or whatever. When I say that, I mean anybody with a C in front of their name, the CEO, the CMO, the COO, like all those guys, CFO, and if it's like a C-suite decision, that's going to be a decision by committee most likely. But I still try to nail down like a decision maker who's ultimately accountable for that and limit the number of revisions. And if they're unwilling to do that, and they're like, no, we really need these 3 people in the room, then I'm like, okay, my price just doubled. And that's not because I'm upset, but that's just because I know that this is going to take a lot more time.
Yeah.
And if they introduce new players into the situation late, all of a sudden somebody's husband or somebody's wife or somebody's nephew or the janitor or their cat or something has a really important opinion to share that seems really valid, that is automatically red flag to me. And I do one of two things. I say, all right, that person needs to be at every meeting now. I'm not going to do this thing where we go back and forth and then you're okay with something and then you go talk to whomever and then you're not okay with it. Like, they sound like they're a stakeholder, so let's get all the stakeholders in the room. Or you need to step out and I need to talk to them. Well, one of those two things will happen, or we kind of just need to revisit what's going on with some change orders and with some, rewording of this contract, because that's a huge weird situation. And if you think about most things that are done by committee are done poorly.
Yeah, there's a good saying about that. It's a camel is a horse designed by committee.
Right.
But that's actually a really good point. But one thing to also keep in mind is like most businesses are a committee, and so like when you're doing editorial work for a magazine, often it has to go to the art director, but then it goes to the editor, the senior editor, and then sometimes the owner before it's completely cleared. But one thing that's beautiful about this is you have a good contract. So like if there's 2 ways I approach it. One is if they're paying me a decent hourly wage, revise away, man. Like,
yeah,
get your whole committee on it. Like, and especially if I'm getting, and I've been smart about my contract, knowing that this is the organization I'm working with, like Cory was talking about, because then I'm being paid for those meetings. So I'm like, you guys want like a 10-hour meeting? Let's do it.
Right.
Let's do it, because the clock is ticking and I'm getting paid by the hour. So I don't care, Yeah. So it's one of those things of like, if you kind of pre-think those problems, and this is why like having things in writing, having a clear agreement, having clarity at the beginning of what the objective the client is trying to achieve is, like, is this client a sole proprietor who you're dealing with directly? Is it an art director? Is it an art director who has to answer to 4 other directors, like a creative director? Like, what's the scenario here? And once you kind of get a vibe of that, then you know how to price it, you know how to quote it, you know how to write your contract, you know that you will not just be having normal client meetings. Like, you might have 10-hour meetings with, the cousin of the CFO or something, like popping their head in the room and being like, I liked it brown, or what,
Yeah.
like, let's color in a rainbow. And it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. If you're billing that, like, great. If they're paying for it, great. Like, we're here to kind of serve and like come up with visual solutions for people's problems. So if they want you to, do that, and that's somehow solving their problem, sure, like, keep writing zeros at the end of that check. But
and that's why I think I called it a yellow flag, is because I agree most businesses are a committee situation, and I don't think that you should it's not something that is ever like necessarily a deal breaker when you're like, oh, there's more than one decision maker. If you're working with an art director, you need to know that that art director is ultimately accountable to at least one, if not a cadre of other people that they have to also convince. And so if you make it hard for them, that's not worth it. But
Yeah.
in a good situation, ultimately you have a single point of contact. You're dealing with that art director, and they
Yeah.
deal with the politics on their side.
Oh yeah.
And it becomes a significantly different situation if you're dealing with the art director and the CEO and the board of directors, and
Yeah.
the whatever, usually that's an indication that that art director doesn't have as much power as they should. Um,
100.
so yeah.
Yeah.
Another huge red flag. I'm just going to throw this one out there. Um, and this is I'm not going to call this yellow because but it's not 100% of the time red. So here's the caveat: in certain industries, this isn't possible. So having said that, most of the time I try to get money up front, and
Oh yeah.
that money up front, my rule of thumb is if it's under $3,000, then I get half down. If it's over $3,000, then I get a third down. And almost anyone, with the exception of those industries where it's common that this isn't the way to do it, almost anyone who has a problem with that is not. It's a huge red flag, because that means that they don't trust you, or that they are going to try to not pay you.
Yep.
And if there's a lack of trust or an intent to steal, I'm not interested in either of those relationships.
Yeah, and I definitely say that goes for most very small businesses. Like most small businesses can do half.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the exceptions usually when you're dealing with like a giant corporation, because they have finance departments and 50 other departments, and so like they usually those businesses will give you a contract. So that's kind of a
Right.
to me that would be the alleviation of that red flag. Although read that contract.
Yeah.
Don't just sign it going, oh, how exciting, I get to work for so and so. No, read the contract
Yeah.
and negotiate it if you don't agree with it. um,
Yeah, because a lot of times I notice that those big companies, their contracts, sometimes it's just some lawyer that knows nothing about really rights for artists and things
yeah.
like that. And a lot of times, if you point that out, you can change something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, it depends on the job. Like, if you're talking like editorial illustration, you want to start debating contracts. Like, you're pretty much they're going to give it to another illustrator.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're talking like, like a big project for a beer company or like a giant shoe company or something like that, you're going to be doing development, and it's a big like 4 month job or something. In that case, yeah, you definitely need to read that contract, and also like coming up with a half up front is not a bad method, especially on small jobs. Like Cory was describing, if it's a relatively small budget, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to accommodate it. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, a good red flag is the like, if somebody has a different process, they'll usually be able to explain it and be like, okay, well, we can't do the half up front because this is how we run. And once again, they'll have clarity on how they work financially.
Right.
Um, a big red flag is somebody who just is like flat out like, no, hell no, like I'm not putting a dollar of my money in it, because once again, it's about kind of everybody having vested interest in this thing succeeding.
Yeah.
And so it's
Or if they are like, oh, but we're in a really big hurry, and it's like if they're trying to hurry you past the point of paying,
yeah,
um, I usually my comeback for that is usually like, I'm
hurry and get.
sorry, I have a studio rule. Like the rule of my studio is that I can't get started on work until I see the money up front. But we've got this really fast deadline. Well, then hurry your accountant.
Yeah.
Hurry them along. You can pay
Well,
me
it's a lot.
electronically or via paper. I don't care. But like when I get that money and the check clears, then then I'll jump in.
It's so easy to pay people nowadays. You got
Yeah.
Venmo, you got Apple Pay, you got PayPal,
Yeah, and once again, like using those systems, like I'd recommend using PayPal because it's so secure compared to a lot of there's other payment systems that like my wife's been dipping into freelance and she had this one attempted client who didn't end up closing on the thing because they wanted to pay through like something that was kind of like akin to like Western Union. It was like we read the fine print on this like new apps site, and it was pretty much like had this qualification that you could make the payment and then cancel it like the second you'd sent it out.
Yeah.
So it's like equivalent to like a canceled check, which is no good. But we're in we're in a world where it's not super hard to pay through like a secure payment system and make that happen. And like we said at the top, like people who are kind of quibbling about money. I've actually heard some really tall ones. I've heard clients who are like, "But we don't have the money to pay that." And I'm like, "Well,
Okay.
then how are you gonna have the money when I'm done? Like I don't buy it. Like
Yeah.
if you're not solvent when you're starting, why should I trust that you're gonna be solvent when we finish?"
Yeah.
So I think that can weed out a lot of potential bad eggs from the whole thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot more red flags and stuff, but I do worry we're gonna go a little too long.
Well, and I think a good way to wrap this up is kind of what we were saying at the beginning. And I think it was Josh that was saying that. This entire conversation feels very much like we're trying to tell everybody to be really defensive and on guard and like attack and be weird, but like you shouldn't expect people to screw you over. And if you behave as if they're going to screw you over, you're probably going to sour too many relationships until you kind of figure out. There's a phrase that I really like: "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." And like your interaction, your interpersonal communication, um, you know, you should trust people, and you should expect good relationships with your clients. The reason that I think this is an important conversation is because the expectation of good and trustworthy people, you need kind of this little safeguard in there. It happens often, but it doesn't. I don't think it's the norm. You know what I mean? I think once you kind of are starting to get established, you'll start to kind of feel out like, oh yeah, like legitimate and real clients are awesome, and it's never weird, and it's and sometimes there's miscommunication, and sometimes there's differences of opinion, but like that never becomes combative. It just becomes like, oh well, here's where I'm coming from, or this is why I'm charging this, or you can't pay that. Let's see what we can do to pare down the amount of work so that I can meet your budget, but not lower my price on what it is that I'm delivering.
Yeah.
That type of that's all normal communication stuff, and that's one of my major problems with the way a lot of the things that are written and spoken about client relations. They seem really aggressive, and so take all of this that we've just said as good internal kind of warning systems, but not as kind of an attitude to go and view and interact with the world.
Yeah, and I want to cap on that by saying there's a couple things too. Is like wanting to get paid for work in a work for hire situation is not bad.
Yep,
Um,
nope, that's
that's
normal.
actually moral and that's legal. So to like whatever you do when you're out there working for clients, a lot of people devalue art. A lot of people devalue time that's spent by artists, and not just artists. There's other fields that suffer from this too. I think actors have that all the time. Um, but there's this kind of assumption that like we're just kind of having fun doing what we're doing, and there's also this tendency with really bad actors in the industry that Cory just described are really rare to try to make you feel like you don't have integrity and that your time does not have value and that you are somehow kind of beholden or like a slave to their thing because they're giving you $1. And I would just remind like artists too to just kind of go into their work with pride, not like bad pride, just pride in your own value and pride in the fact that you can walk out. Like you always have that option to walk out of a deal. And that's why you want to pay really careful attention to your contracts. It's just one of those things of like, if you end up in a situation, especially in freelance, where you're like getting designed by committee to death and you don't want to do that job anymore, you're not beholden to do that job depending on your contract. And
Yeah.
so, like I said, you can actually walk out. And there's this weird trick that high pressure salespeople have, like, and we've all experienced it at car dealerships where you walk in and you're not walking out till they get you a car, and that person's not going to let you walk. But there's this beauty to this moment where you're able to just kind of go, okay, that's not the deal I want, and you can walk. And like there's a freedom to it, and there's an empowerment to it. So like I said, I would definitely keep that in mind when you're freelancing. Don't forget you have that card in your pocket. You can always walk, and you don't have to take every job. And in fact, sometimes turning down bad jobs might be the smartest decision you make, because while you're working on that bad job, you may not have time to answer or send out that query that's going to get you the really juicy, great work. And so I would recommend that too, for people out there. So yeah, don't be cynical, but don't be foolish.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to check out Scott Serkland's stuff, then you can go to circworks.com. If you want to check out Joshua Kemble's stuff, you can go to quarterlystories.com. And if you want to check out my stuff, you can go to corykerr.com. And as always, this podcast is available on corykerr.com/48hr. And we'd love whatever reviews and everything that you can send our way. Thanks everybody in the chat. And this has been awesome. We'll probably continue certain parts of this in the future. And we'll see you guys in a few days.
See you.